a little video demonstrating how this looks right now. So in the beginning, of course, the Earth was void and in darkness. And then there was a curriculum structure. Now, this is a cloud database, a graph database consisting of about 150 different learning activities and student items. So things that students produce in these activities, and they're connected via different scientific practices that are being employed in these various activities. Okay, so this is a 3D visualization of that network. This is not the real curriculum. It is a mock-up of a real curriculum based on information available in our current program. Now we can, of course, go in here. There is data in here, and we can extract information on the different activities. Here's an example. This is the Spain field trip, which is a real activity in our program. And we can also look at different types of items that the students produce. In this case, they can choose to have a blog post or a podcast or whatever. And we have assessment criteria standards in here as well. Now, from this complex structure, we can then derive very simple summary information. So it's a database in that sense. Here are different student items that they produce during the program. We can look at scientific practices that students encounter during the different parts, during the different semesters. And so the key to be able to use this complex structure is the ability to extract simple information from it that's useful in mapping and designing the curriculum. And this is available for everyone in a dashboard environment. Now, this is a prototype. So this is just an example of some of the things that we can do. And of course, the complexity of the underlying structure is not that's not the ultimate goal. We want to capture it and to represent it, but in order for us to use it, we have to extract simple visual information from it. As I mentioned, this is a mock-up. So this is made, Dario actually made this curriculum structure using information from the existing bachelor program and turning it into these small little activities here with student items associated with them. And then they're connected into this fuzzy ball using scientific practices in this case. And we can connect it with different types of properties down the line. Now, you can also zoom in, you can look at individual activities here. And this, again, this is an example of an existing activity in our program. And you can look at it from different perspectives. And one of the key things we want to do down the line is to involve students in using this type of interface to engage with the curriculum and see, okay, what can I do? What are the possibilities for me to create my own pathway through a bachelor degree, for example? Now, this is the visualization of the graph information as it is, but we also have then an app in which you can create new activities. And this we have tested with a group of teachers. So this is a relatively simple interface where you can go in and you can define a new activity and choose how you want to describe it and what kind of items students work on and what kind of practices you want to include in your activities. And whenever you enter information in this, it immediately appears in the graph database, and you can visualize it and connect it to the other activities in the program. So we now have sort of a working prototype framework for doing the things that we aim to do. And then the process now going forward is to engage people and involve them in trying this out, and then adapting it to the needs that people have, both students and teachers and other people involved, including administration, of course. But now I want to take a step back and talk a little bit about why we want to do such a thing in the first place. And the starting point is this book. It's a cult classic, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. Now, first time I heard about this book, I thought it was some kind of, pot smoking manifesto. I didn't really know anything about it, but that's definitely not what it is. I mean, it's basically a serious philosophical inquiry into the fundamental nature of quality, the metaphysics of quality. Now, it was published in 1974 after 121 failed attempts, which is also pretty zen. So the book is not really about Zen, and it's not really about motorcycles either. In this book, we meet the author's former self, which goes under the name of Phaedrus. He was a university teacher in the 1950s or thereabouts, and he was obsessed with the concept of quality, trying to sort of pinpoint what it is. And his quest to trying to sort of understand quality basically led to a complete breakdown and loss of everything. He lost his family and his property and everything. And he was hospitalized in the early 60s, and that meant, in the US at least, that he was subjected to electroconvulsive therapy. And so Phaedrus, his former self, also disappeared, temporarily at least. Now, in this book, of course, we then meet him. The narrative structure is him going on a bike trip with his son. And the book is full of these retracing the steps of Phaedrus, this university teacher. And there's a lot of discussion about quality, and many of the things he says include things like quality. Well, quality couldn't be independently related with either the subject or the object, but could be found only in the relationship between the two, of the two with each other. Okay. And there are many highly quotable passages in here now. Lots of discussion of teaching and learning and university curricula. And he says things like, well, as a teacher, he tried to get rid of grading because he thought that was in the way of quality learning. But when he tried to get rid of grades, the students reacted very negatively because that destroyed the entire system. Right? Well, I mean, that's what we're here for, said the students. We're here for the grades. You can't get rid of them. And he said, well, the really good stuff happens when you don't really teach. It happens in spite of the instruction, not because of it. That seemed to make sense to him. So he was then ready to resign because he wasn't needed as a teacher. And there's a lot of discussion on university, what it is, university curriculum. The curriculum is a troublesome concept for educators because of its many intangible qualities. And you cannot really define those qualities. It's tricky. Now, if we fast forward to today's situation, of course, the time for philosophical waffling about quality is over, because now we live in the day of quality management. Quality is a management problem, not a philosophical problem. It's about certifications and standards and accreditation in higher education. Of course, we have government organizations tasked with ensuring quality in higher education, and every higher education institution has its own quality assurance system, like we do at University of Bergen. And how did we end up in this situation? Well, this is described in the social science literature as a change in university governance, at least in the European context, that is referred to as managerialism or new managerialism in higher education. And it's been described as an ideological configuration of ideas and practices of organizational management and regulation of employee behavior in public service organizations, particularly education and health. Okay. Now, it has a technical twin, which we know as new public management, which is more closely associated with public choice theory. And here are some of the hallmarks of this, which we can recognize. So there's a focus on performance evaluation, right? So customer satisfaction, ranking of university is something that is very at the forefront. There is audit. There needs to be accountability and transparency, and the use of metrics. So there has to be measurable results. And the goal, of course, is cost efficiency, so doing more with less. And the rise of managerialism in higher education is commonly associated with a whole bunch of different factors that we know: the massification of previously elite higher education, globalization and internationalization of higher education, the change in government policies and rhetoric throughout the decades, and in many cases it's linked to transnational organizations such as OECD and the World Bank. Of course, the ideological roots of this go much deeper. For those interested, I can point to some literature on that. Now, Norway was a late bloomer in terms of higher education reform. So first in 2003, we had the quality reform. Now, the final evaluation report of the quality reform makes a few interesting remarks. It says, well, the design and implementation of quality systems is almost exclusively done by administrative staff. And there are two ways we can view this, okay? So it's bureaucratization, okay, that sounds bad, or it's professionalization, which sounds a bit better depending on how cynical you are. So quality is something best left to quality professionals, not random academics. And there's an explicit warning in this report. They say there is an absolute danger that these quality systems will disengage academics and students from quality work. And of course, there have been many other reports talking about the quality reform. Ironically, there was an audit by the Office of the Auditor General, auditing the auditors, with pretty damning conclusions in terms of the measurable goals of the quality reform. It was supposed to improve the student completion rates. It hasn't done so. And the interventions that were put in place have had little effect. Plans have failed to increase the production of credits. And there seems to be little enthusiasm for using completion rate as a measure of quality. That's another failure. Then came along the National Qualifications Framework, which is another step in the follow-up of the Bologna process. And that introduced Norwegian academics to learning outcomes and learning outcome descriptions in higher education. And we have these three categories: knowledge, skills, and general competence. And in the process of implementing this, there was a group of academic developers, and I believe Torgny was one of them, that tried to sort of resist this a little bit. And they had some objections. So it's really not possible to express higher education in uniform terms as learning outcomes. And there's no mention of attitudinal aspects of these qualifications. And it does not distinguish intended learning outcomes from achieved learning outcomes. And how can general competence be a subcategory? And this is something that all of us have felt when trying to describe these learning outcomes using general competence as this added subcategory. It's tricky and weird. And that means that these descriptions are going to be very ambiguous, and they will be used differently in different contexts by different people. But of course, resistance is futile, as we all know. You can see my pop cultural references have now shifted from the 70s to the 80s. So the National Qualifications Framework assumed that these learning outcomes would enhance accountability and transparency. There will be standardization across programs and across countries, and therefore international mobility. And it would enhance the use of learner-centered pedagogies. But studies of these learning outcomes in this project in Norway found that, well, there is too much ambiguity, too much context dependence in how these things are used. And there's a tension between the quality assurance control systems and the way pedagogies act out in practice. They don't really align very well. And there's very little evidence that higher education learning outcomes per se have had any impact on educational transformation per se. So now there are calls to sort of reclaim many of these educational concepts that have been misappropriated for the purposes of audit and control. You know, constructive alignment and learning outcomes, they were intended to be educational, pedagogical concepts, and now they have become these control concepts, and that's not really good. So they need to be reclaimed for their original purpose. Another aspect of managerialism is its effect on research. And one of the worst consequences of managerialism is publication gaming, okay, or gaming the metrics. So this is seen as a direct effect of the metrics culture. Publish more, publish in high impact journals, you know, citation indices and so on and so forth. And as scientists, we have essentially become complicit in turning research into a game that rewards short-term success and individual success. Okay, and we are all playing this game now. There are also work-life effects. Here's a study of UK business schools, 24 different UK universities, the business schools using a job demands resources model, showing that this wicked combination of, you know, having to do more with lower resources is a significant factor in increasing burnout and turnover. And this metrics culture increases the workload, but reduces freedom and workplace support at the same time. And this is now something that can be documented fairly robustly in higher education institutions. Now, it's irresistible to mention this thesis by Bjarte that looks into Norwegian academics' reactions to managerialism. Okay? And it comes in different flavors. You have resistance, which can be covert. And these are very familiar things like, you know, hiding from your workplace in order to get work done, and acting stupid, saying, oh, I didn't know I had to do that. But of course you knew, you just didn't do it. And then there are open forms of resistance, such as blatant ignoring of demands, and overachieving, which is a special flavor of resistance that might be unique to academics. So doing a lot more supervision than you are supposed to because of your underlying norms. And then there's gaming, there's publication gaming and research. In education, you have things like teaching to the test, which is known also from school systems. So teaching students what they need to do in order to get a good grade on the exam. And then, of course, passing students, giving passing grades so that it doesn't look too bad on the sort of budgetary end of things. Now, academics that are confronted with these practices are very clear that they are unethical practices, and they don't want anyone to know that they're doing these things. So there's a conflict between what they do and their ethical norms. And then there's this in-between thing, the mediation, trying to meet standards whilst upholding their academic norms. And so there's this tension between managerial and academic norms that make academic workplace resistance different from general workplace resistance. And Bjarte has this quote saying, well, the very way in which management rigs the organization towards excellence becomes the fabric of what academics claim ruins excellence. And that seems not to be a sustainable state of affairs. And just a final note, I mean, if anything else, the reason why you should care about these things is because, well, sooner or later, the agents will arrive. And if you look internationally, the big four accounting firms are already heavily involved in higher education. And in this case, PricewaterhouseCoopers, this is in the US, so it's not the same system, but still, it's only a matter of time. And you can see here, well, PricewaterhouseCoopers believes there are 4 business imperatives facing higher education institutions today. One of them, of course, is to demonstrate value. Okay. And this is all going to catch up with us at some point if we don't actually take ownership to quality work and curriculum work at our own education institutions. So what is curriculum then in higher education? Because if you look at the quality reform and all these policy documents and what's been done over the last few decades, there's a lot of focus on learning outcome descriptions, but there's very little talk of curriculum per se. And what I'll be doing here is I'll be inspired by Ronna Barnett, who is a leading thinker in terms of higher education, university, and curriculum. Now he's not the only one. There are several other people out there that have done similar types of work. I find this, it kind of resonates with me personally, a lot of the things that he's writing about. So that's my starting point for thinking about what curriculum is. And many of the things he talks about in his books is quite aligned with what we want to do in our framework as well. So according to Barnett, we can think of curriculum using 3 sort of dimensions. One is the knowing dimension. This is the epistemological dimension, if you will, where students can widen their understanding and perspectives. And then there is the acting dimension. This is a practical dimension, if you will, where you can accomplish actions in academic and non-academic domains. And I'm going to use my own kind of interpretation of Barnett. So this is not exactly what Barnett says himself, and it's very difficult to do justice to his writings in a short talk. But in my interpretation, we can think of the curriculum as stated in learning outcomes as sort of a projection on this knowing acting plane. So on this projection, we can have knowledge, competence, and skills written down somehow. And this would be the curriculum as text, or the curriculum as planned, or the curriculum as designed. Or you could call it the checklist approach to curriculum. And the missing term in that view of curriculum is the 3rd dimension of Barnett's curriculum concept, and that is the being dimension. So the curriculum as text is a flat, inert, it's a thin concept of curriculum. And the being dimension, well, you can think of knowledge. Well, knowledge does not really exist outside of a knower. And in order to act, there has to be someone taking action. And so the being dimension is an ontological dimension, where students develop the necessary dispositions and capacities for self-awareness, self-confidence, self-critique, self-direction. And this arguably is the most important dimension, because without it, the other dimensions cannot really develop. So as an example, you could specify a list of critical thinking skills, and that's fine, and you could put them on your CV. But unless you have the disposition to respond in a critical manner in any given situation, they don't really amount to anything. Okay. So that's why you need this being dimension. And it's not just about the self, it's about the self in relation to other beings, to other ways of being, other ways of knowing and acting. So it's a being in the world, not just an individual being. So the curriculum then can be viewed as the interaction of all those involved in this knowing, acting, being space. And Kathy actually shared a very nice, succinct definition of curriculum, which goes along the same lines. So you can think of curriculum as an active and emergent process involving student and staff interaction and negotiation of the whole experience of learning. And the key point from Barnett's point of view is that, well, the curriculum is not really about filling this space with content. It's about opening spaces. So traditionally, we are very preoccupied with thinking about having to fill courses and credits and time and space and students' minds with content. But the specific thing about higher education is that it should open spaces for students to explore and find new pathways in this structure. So the key question then for higher education curriculum is, how do we create such spaces that are open, yet they have to be structured somehow? And they are always in motion, yet we need to ensure pedagogical responsibility. It can't just be completely open to anything. This is the challenge. And this is, we believe, where our framework can come in. So the graph database framework and the three key principles, visibility, connectivity, and flexibility, is also a projection of this complex real curriculum structure. There's no way you can capture the reality of things going on continuously, and we don't want that. But it is intermediate between the reality of the curriculum and the oversimplified, let's see, I'm going backwards here. Well, first of all, why do we want to have this framework here in the first place? Well, in order for us to foster the conversations about teaching and learning that we want, we need to have this structure that allows us to talk about the things we need to talk about. It's very difficult today with our current structure to know exactly what we should be discussing when we discuss teaching and learning. So that's one aspect of it. We need to have things visible so that we can see the new possibilities. And this is both for students and teachers. How can you know what's possible? And how can we structure these new spaces? How can we let students explore and go into the unknown in a way that is safe, so they can take risks without suffering any penalty? And it's creative in the sense that we can all take part in making new elements. And it's adaptive in the sense that it can change when we have new insights and new needs. And it's collaborative. It should be available to everyone. And then we can see the management systems. So the quality assurance systems is one step further in the complexity reduction. So what we argue is that we can use our framework and then from that export more simplified descriptors that we can use in the quality assurance system. And this is how we can get to squaring the circle. So being able to do things in a way that allows for freedom and openness and flexibility, and at the same time being able to meet control system demands. And when we talk about this, one common objection is that, yes, but these knowledge, skills, and competency things, that's reality. That's what we need to do. So if we are realistic, we have to stay over here on the management system side. All this other stuff is just abstract nonsense. But arguably, it's the other way around. So this thing on the right, although it's just a cartoon, well, that's the reality. That's the curriculum in action. That's what's going on. The knowledge, skill, competence learning outcome descriptions is an abstraction. And our framework is in between these two. So it's closer to the real, but it's still connected to the abstract. And so I think that's important that we switch the perspective here. The simplified quality assurance system is not the real system. It's the abstract system. Okay. Now, there are some issues with the way our program is today. And I refer to this as the curse of the 10 credit course. So essentially our program consists of a bunch of courses. Many of them are 10 credits. And that makes it very difficult to make changes. And we have certain challenges with the current situation that we believe we can address very effectively with our new framework. One is a lack of visibility and connectivity. Okay, so there's a fragmentation in our program. Okay, and that fragmentation comes in many flavors. I mean, the earth sciences are fragmented at our institution, it's fragmented within our department, and it's fragmented into these courses. So it's very difficult to see any coherent structure, even if it's there. And then what's in a name? We have this issue, which is a little bit underappreciated, I think, that we are using terms and words that take on a life of their own, and they become more important than the kind of real ontological entities that are actually present in the course. But the labels take over and they become the important thing. And this is something we need to address, and we can address it. And then, of course, we have a history of private ownership that also affects many of these courses that we have. And as the teacher, well, I mean, if you're given a 10 credit chunk in a given semester, you're sort of compelled to cram everything that is your topic into this one course. And that's not a very good way of thinking about a curriculum design. And as a student, well, basically, a disconnected program is just like an obstacle course, right? So you have to climb across this thing and crawl onto this other thing in any random order. And the only goal is to finish. And there's no need to look back. All you need is grades and then a stamp of approval, and you're done. And that's also not a good starting point. And there's a lack of flexibility then. So today, at least, with budgetary constraints, if you want to have a new course, well, then some other course has to die. So it's a zero-sum game, and then we're setting up a system where education is just another arena for resource competition. Not a good collaborative environment. And the famous retirement problem, right? So Professor X is retiring. Who's going to replace this charismatic person? Nobody really wants to step in. And that, of course, is not the way we should be thinking about teaching. We should be thinking about the people that we have at any given time and how they can use their competence in the best possible way. And again, we need to be able to, we need to want to, and be allowed to take chances, both teachers and students. So going into new places without risk of penalty. So that's an issue now. It seems too risky to do new things, right? Is it going to work? You know, are the students going to get their grades safely and soundly? So let's see here. Did I go through all of those things? Yes. So with our new framework, we highlight these three properties that we believe are necessary to overcome these problems that we're having. We want to reimagine the curriculum as this network of interactive learning activities that are connected in terms of topics and practices, so along learning descriptors, but also temporally connected into learning progressions that make sense. So every little molecule here is like a learning activity. And for a teacher, well, you don't really have to be constrained to having to teach a 10-credit course at any given semester. You can enter into this structure whenever you're teaching activities and your competencies are most meaningful. And that means you could meet students at different points throughout the bachelor program. And for a student, well, it should be possible for you to combine different activities into larger modules in different ways, depending on your preferences. You don't have to be locked into having this specific course in this specific semester. There should be more flexibility. And different students might do it differently, and that should be okay. And these chunks, these modules, could be of a size that meets management demands. So if the system wants the unit to be 10 credits, then 10 credits is what that chunk will be. But it doesn't have to be fixed. And within those modules, the activities, some of them could be open. And maybe more of them could be open as we progress through the bachelor degree. So it's not pre-specified necessarily what the students are going to do. And they might choose and might design their own ways of doing things. And then that means there should also be a possibility to choose different trajectories throughout the bachelor program. And there should be a possibility to strike a balance between having certain fixed demands. So, for example, every student should encounter a certain set of scientific practices throughout a bachelor program so that it can be accepted as a bachelor degree. But in terms of the topics that they visit during that journey, we don't have to be too strict about that. So there should be a lot more flexibility in how students design their own learning trajectories throughout the system. And this is how I think we can move towards Barnett's ideal of opening spaces rather than filling them in and closing everything and collapsing it to a flat list of skills or whatever. Now, this project is also a change initiative. Now, we've had this course led by Torgny and Sohoya and these other people at Lund. So we learned a lot about how to think about change initiatives and the need to have multiple change theories in order to increase the chances of success here. So in our case, we definitely are dealing with social cognition theories of change, specifically sense-making. And in addition, we have a cultural change perspective. So the values and beliefs of the people involved are critical. And both of these are typically slow change processes. It takes time to work because we have to learn things and we have to question what we believe as we go along. That is going to take some time. Now, what we've done so far in Focus Area 1, we've had in 2021, we had a series of meetings, quite extensive meetings and quite a few dinners, I should say, with a working group at the University of Bergen, Department of Earth Science, consisting of 6 teaching staff, 2 master students, and 4 educationalists. And most of the discussion, at least the intention, was to discuss how to represent teaching and learning in a graph ontology as a lead up to developing this digital framework. And we summarized a lot of the thinking in this manifesto document that we published on iEarth. So you can have a look at that. Rapidly becoming outdated, we should say. And then in March, we had a testing of the prototype, okay, and a focus group with the members of the working group, as well as 2 additional colleagues and an advisor from the IT department who's been working on the quality assurance system. And that was a hands-on test. So basically using the app and the visualization that is associated with it to design learning activities. So in the months following the site visit that we had in the fall, Christian Hager, who's on this picture down here in the lower right, took it upon himself to develop a Flutter app to interact with an online graph database. So you can go in, design learning activities, and they immediately appear in this database, and then we can visualize it using this other dashboard. Now, in the focus group, which was led by Kara Bjørge Johnsen at the Læringslab, the participants in this prototype testing did basically demonstrate, what is the word? Agree that the app had sense-making potential, right? So some of the comments point to the fact that, well, it does stimulate discussion, and it's this type of discussion that we really need. And it's great to be able to make connections between the different elements of teaching and learning. And it's very useful to think about scientific practices as this generic concept that connects many of the things that we do. And mapping is needed to improve the bachelor program. There was also a dissenting view that, clicking on an app is not really what we need. It's kind of a blind alley, and that the process itself is way too slow. And we should sit down and discuss across different groups rather than focusing on this digital interface. Okay, and that's natural and a good thing that we are having multiple views. And it's key in order for us to move towards a change that we can have that we can collectively make sense of what we need and how we want to move towards that goal. So a few words about the next steps. In terms of the prototype, we are now busy trying to add topics, which is a tricky thing. So this is the naming issue. So we've scavenged around 1,000 or more topics from the bachelor program descriptions that are out there. And so this helps us solve this what's in a name problem, right? Because we have to move towards a state where we realize that any given element of teaching and learning can belong in different categories. This is critical. And why it's critical is because then we can design and map the curriculum from different perspectives. And that is absolutely vital. So, something can be both geology and geophysics, right? I mean, I can hear the distant thunder of mines exploding as I say that. I mean, it's very subversive, but nevertheless true. And then we want to develop more templates and good use cases for people to see, how is this useful for me? And student focus groups is our next main target. So we want students to test this out. Does this allow them to see the possibilities that they have, ways in which they can make new combinations, find new pathways in the curriculum, and map their own learning journeys, and create what we call bachelor portfolios. So something a lot more, let's say, comprehensive that you could show a potential employer, showing how you worked on different scientific practices and different generic competencies throughout the bachelor program, rather than just a list of grades. And then the squaring the circle problem. So having an open and flexible curriculum structure that is in constant motion, and at the same time meet quality assurance system demands for complexity reduction. This is critical, I think. So we want to make life easier for the administration. But at the same time, we have to be able to work closer to the reality of the curriculum in action. And then finally, there are some formal aspects of system development that needs to be figured out. So should we hire externals to help develop this framework? We need to clarify ownership to what has been already developed. And that's all I could think of 5 minutes before giving this talk. I don't know, Dario, do you have anything to add to the list?
No, I think you summed it up really nicely.
Okay, good. All right, then I think I've blathered through everything I needed to blather through, and I can take questions.